Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristan Lass, and today I'm joined by my dear friend Kevin Gamble. He and I are going to discuss a topic. But before we get into that, I would like to mention something. I do have the first piece of Fearless DIY merch on my head. My daughter decided this would be a cool birthday present, so this is kind of a beta test on whether, the logo looks good on apparel, and this hat turned out quite well. There are some tweaks to be made to it, but when we do reach a certain number of subscribers, hint, hint, please hit subscribe if you're watching this. Once we hit some, once we get enough people and we get some people who are interested, and if you're interested now, leave it in the comments. It's a cool, I think it's a really cool logo. My wife and I designed it together. She takes most of the credit, and it looks great on things. So that's something that we can look forward to in the future. And if Kevin has any questions, let's hit those up, and then we'll jump into the topic.
Well, I'll be first in line to order one of those. I know there are a lot of DIYers out there, and so it's a good philosophy to champion, especially in this artificial age. So looking forward to that. I've got my really old merch on today. I recently came across a stash of old concert tees.
Oh, there
from
you go.
Probably the late '80s. So
nice.
I've got my Aerosmith concert tee here. From seeing them, and might see those pop up from time to time on these conversations. Some of them fit a little better than others at this point, but most of them still work. But
The
very much
ravages
looking
of
forward to
time.
the new merch. So that's going to be good stuff.
Yeah, it'll be fun once we get there.
But I did want to check in. I saw your video recently about recording guitars and techniques for doing that. And I know you're in the middle of an album recording project. So just wanted to check in and see how that's going and, where you are in the process right now.
Well, this week would be like kind of the beginning of week 4 of really being in the trenches. The basic tracks are essentially done. I've got 10 songs. I've got acoustic guitars, electric guitars, and bass all recorded, the main parts. And now this week, I will probably do some content creation and then spend a couple days putting in what I like to call, the detail guitars, where it's like, I played the part on, I play most of the tracks just all the way through. On one instrument, and then I'll go back and I'll be like, that's going to actually be nylon. And so I'll go ahead and put in the nylon part. So this week will be kind of filling in those gaps, and then I will finalize my lyrics and my vocal melodies next. And that'll take some time just to get those tweaked before I actually record them. And then traditionally, I lastly record lead guitar and stuff like that, or if there's going to be any synthesizers or keyboards. Those are the very last things that I do. But the basic tracks are done. I know what it looks like, I know what it sounds like, and I'm very happy at this point. So,
Well, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear it. And, I think this is a good thing for viewers of the channel to keep tabs on because there aren't many other creators that I'm aware of where they're not just talking about technical things, they're actually recording their own art that they have been developing over many years. And so this isn't just, here's a pedal, here's what you do to stick a mic in front of an amp. This is something that connects to the ongoing creation of music. And so you can go back and watch the videos about the studio setup. You can watch the videos about different recording techniques that are still to come, and then at the end of it you'll have a finished album that you can listen to and sort of see the full realization of this technique. So it's it's not to focus inwardly on the channel too much, but this is kind of a unique unusual opportunity for visitors of the channel to kind of see how all these dots connect and see how it parallels their own creative process start to finish. So looking forward to seeing more about the process.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, and as we get closer, we'll probably be doing more conversations about, maybe just about, the whole process once I get a little bit deeper in, and I really have, I have more time, because right now I'm not in a race, but I do have a deadline that I'd like to hit And so I do want to get all the tracking done. Once I get to the mixing process, that's all fun, because you're just like, oh, well, I just want to see how it actually is going to end up sounding. But thank you for that, Kevin. And I guess I will now introduce our topic for this week. I thought it would be interesting, since we've kind of done a few musicology kind of things, to maybe Kevin and I, choose. I was like, hey, Kevin, why don't you choose a couple bands that you think are sorely overlooked in music history, and we can discuss them in brief, and then I'll do the same. And that's what we're going to do today. I think it will inform people who are regulars on the channel or do become regulars of the channel a little bit of where our aesthetic lies. So I will go ahead and start. And the band that I would like to talk about first is Mission of Burma. They are what you might want to call, a post-punk, but they really kind of came into their own in the late 70s, 78, 79. It was a three-piece band, but with kind of a secret weapon fourth member. The members of the band were Roger Miller on guitar. He was a very unorthodox songwriter and unorthodox guitar player. If you're looking for inspiration for chasing different chord shapes, sounds, textures, approaches, he used slides in unconventional ways. He was a very, very creative songwriter as well, kind of coming from the school of Dada style writing. He was very informed by that art movement, and he enjoys kind of putting together very disparate parts to still make a 3-minute pop song. So it's very cool to see his work. On bass, you had Clint Conley, who is perhaps one of the hookiest bass players of all time. Tremendous voice. He was responsible for a lot of the band's more accessible material, the stuff that you may be, already familiar with, but I kind of doubt that that's true. So I'll have some songs for you to go to check out. His song, he was actually known as the Hook Machine, was kind of his nickname. On drums was Peter Prescott. He was also a songwriter and singer in the band. He usually contributed at least 1 to 2 compositions per project. So he was not to be underestimated as well. Very, very good drummer. All three of them together were an incredible unit when they were hitting on all cylinders. They were known for being inconsistent live, though. And then there was Martin Swope, who was a sound engineer. They had a dedicated sound person who did all of their live shows and worked with them in the studio, but he also did tape collages. In real time, while they were playing live, he would capture a part on a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Then he would play it back through the PA system and manipulate it using effects and time delays and things like that. So there was a fourth sonic entry into their live performances that was completely random. He picked different things every time, so it gave their shows, they were like art installation pieces almost sonically. So very cool, very unique. The key songs from Mission of Burma that I think that you should go and check out would be This Is Not a Photograph, which is also the name of their documentary, which you should check out as well. It's an excellent documentary. Academy Fight Song is another critical track from them. When I Reach for My Revolver is their most famous song. It kind of doesn't play as well now in this age of gun violence, but when it was composed, that was something of an outlier in American culture, not like it is today. And then Peking Spring is another very accessible, short, almost punk track, but they always put some art into their music. They only really had one major release, the album Verses, and they also had an EP called Signals, Calls, and Marches, which is also great to check out. What I love about Mission of Burma is they had just a unique perspective on how to make music. You could say they fall into the punk or post-punk category, but they were art as well. And just to hear the different textures, approaches to melody and rhythm that they took, I would behoove everyone to check them out. You will be inspired, and it can let you know that it's okay to write your own stuff and not follow formula. They're one of the least formulaic bands you'll ever listen to. And I'll let Kevin go with his first selection.
Well, that's a great way to start, Tris. And it actually is a really good segue to some of what I wanted to cover with my first artist. First off, I thought about how to narrow this down because there's a huge number of artists we could each talk about. But, remembering the context here, fearless DIY music, I wanted to pick artists that have really done it their own way, really throughout their careers and sort of, music together in a very idiosyncratic way. And also what you mentioned about, making their own art, really making statements through the music. We touched on some of that in our Devo conversation recently. But that's a great example. And so is the first one I wanted to cover. It's very common for bands who achieve any kind of success to have individual members of the band do solo work or have solo albums. Most of the time, that's the lead singer, and it'll end up sounding like kind of a watered down version of the main band. But it's far less common for an individual who comes to prominence in a band to have a fully realized solo career and a completely realized and separate artistic message and aesthetic and sound to their music that is every bit as developed as that of the main band. And that's the case with the first person I wanted to mention. Many people have heard of the band The Church. Everyone knows the song Under the Milky Way, and anyone sort of a fan of new wave alternative music through the 80s probably picked up on some of their other music as well. But what often gets lost in the shuffle is those offshoot projects. And in this case, I wanted to mention one of the guitarists in the band named Marty Willson-Piper, who started releasing his own solo music back in the 80s as the band was, even before they had taken off, and is still doing it to this day. And he's an incredibly mature guitarist and songwriter and singer, probably the best singer in the band The Church, even though he didn't get that opportunity as often as the actual lead singer of the band. But his music was always very much sort of out of time, where it might have had sonic elements of the time, but really was about a different kind of aesthetic. A big part of his sound was melodic arpeggios and songs built around those on guitar, whether it's acoustic 12-string or electric. He was known as a Rickenbacker electric player back in that time. So he took the sort of melodic chiming arpeggiated sound maybe from the psychedelic tradition, the Byrds tradition, but didn't apply it in a psychedelic way. It wasn't applied in like a Robin Hitchcock kind of way. He kind of took it in a different direction. I guess you could say sort of a romantic poet type of direction, where there was an atmospheric, emotional, romantic quality to the songs, a literary quality to the songs that really was resulted in something that had a lot of melodic immediacy to it, but also a lot of thoughtfulness to it. And that's something when I look at my record collection, it's like I like a lot of bands that represent a lot of eras and styles and such, but why these particular bands from these different styles? And a lot of times it seems to come down to kind of a thoughtfulness, kind of an insight, a perception, and a sound that might have ties to what's going on around it, but isn't defined by what's going on around it, where it sort of fits in, but it's really somebody making their own personal artistic statement with an incidental connection to the scene going on around it. So it never sounds like it's autopilot trying to sound like what else is going on. So I'll share some links down in the comments on this video for some of what I think are the best songs to check out. He has an enormous catalog of music, electric, acoustic, and everything in between. As I said, still making music to the present day, and just a really rich and really singular collection of songs. It really is about songwriting, and I think we kind of lose that over time with the digital ways of producing and sample-based ways of producing. But from the start to the present day, his music has been built around the song and about what you can do with a voice and a guitar, and developing on that foundation. And it has really been developed and refined to a great degree. So I think if someone wants that sort of haven't already heard it all before. Unique voice on a guitar and an instrument, really in the service of songs, with a sort of real poetic aesthetic to it. He's really worth checking out.
Yeah, he's my favorite thing about the church. I mean, always was. And then when you introduced me to his solo material, I was just like, oh, well, here we go. You know, this, and I still listen to his stuff. You know, it's always in rotation, not too far from the surface. So, very cool for sharing that. The next band I want to talk about is a band called Hum. They were active from the late 80s until 2000, and then they've been kind of in and out of retirement ever since. Their drummer did pass away a few years back, and I think that they are pretty much inactive now. But they're from our neck of the woods. They're from Champaign, Illinois. I'll just go over kind of what I did before, some key tracks, the 3 albums that I have in heavy rotation and have had in heavy rotation since they were released, and talk a little bit about their aesthetic. The lead singer and guitarist is Matt Talbot. Sorry. He has a very kind of laconic yet earnest voice. It is not in keeping with the heaviness of so much of their music, but they do intersperse a lot of, they use a lot of drones, and they do introduce acoustic kind of tones into their songs to give you some relief. But kind of what Hum is known for, these very heavy, sonically rich tapestries that they're borderline heavy metal in some places, but then a lot of people like to lump them in with the space rock movement of the mid to late 90s. I wouldn't put them into that category because I think that they had better songwriting than that and more variety. The lead guitarist was Tim Lash. Of note, he had a really cool Strat that he actually put a Gibson, tailpiece and bridge on. So it's kind of a unique take on modding a Strat, and he was a very great melodic guitar player. The lead singer would mainly, kind of like grind on chords and do solos, but all the real interesting guitar work was undertaken by Lash. Brian St. Pierre, unfortunately, he's singled out a lot of times as being the musical force behind the band. He was an exceptional drummer, and it's a shame that he passed on at my age. He was 52 when he died. It's unfortunate that they lost him. And Jeff Dempsey, a very creative bass player. He's an outside kind of force in the band. His lines are unconventional, and he oftentimes shifted his bass to be in registers that would cut through the heaviness of those 2 guitars going, full bore. He really came up with some nice touches on the bass. They're best known for a song called Stars. Howard Stern was such a fan of the song that he had them on regularly. They were huge on MTV for a brief moment in the mid-90s. I saw them on the I'd Prefer an Astronaut tour at the Blue Note in our hometown. The show was mind-blowing. They were every bit as good live as they were on record, and that always stuck with me because that's why I've remained a fan. One of the reasons why I've remained a fan ever since is because that show just showed me, okay, well, what they do is what they do, and they can recreate it live, which often is not the case with a lot of bands from that era, too, because the production was so good during the mid-90s. With things being organic and dynamic, a lot of times live things just, things hadn't been overly compressed at that point in the history of recording music. And to see a band pull off those dynamics live as well was really impressive before the volume and compression wars kind of killed dynamics in music, period, in my opinion. And then they had a run of 3 albums that were just incredible. There was Electra 2000, which would be the first one to check out. That was their first kind of big release. I'd Prefer an Astronaut was their hit record. And then they had Heavenward is Downward, which some see as being their very best work, but it did kind of signal the end of the band. There were record label issues, as there were with so many of the acts of the 90s towards the end of the decade. They lacked promotion. They were still touring in a van. they decided to pack it up, and they all kind of like went and opened their own recording studios. So that says a little bit about their dedication to capturing sounds, making and working with other bands. And they also just refused to compromise the whole way through, which kind of hurt them a little bit as far as their commercial trajectory. They were, on a rocket ship up, and then the label started asking more of them, and they said no, and that's kind of why they fell off the map. They did reunite, put out some albums here not too long ago. Just in the last decade, there has been a hum release called Inlet, I believe. And it is very good as well. It's of a piece with the rest of their work. If you're interested in heavy guitar music that has brains and has melody and has dynamics, you should check Hum out. And I'll put some links down below as well.
Great. Another great choice. And kind of funny, another unintentional parallel to the next artist I was going to mention is that the artist I'm talking about, even though they're primarily known for being a Canadian band, a Montreal Canadian band. No,
I'm just kidding.
I like Triumph, but no,
I like Triumph too, but they're the Bachman Turner Overdrive of Canada. But anyway,
but no, in this case, even though they're known for being a Canadian band, the brothers who formed the core of the band were actually born in Champaign, Illinois. So kind of a funny thing. But they then moved to Canada and got into the music scene there, and that's really where they originated from artistically. And so this is an interesting one because I think a lot of people know of this band, but I don't think hardly anyone knows this band in the big picture, the grand scheme of things. And so the band is Men Without Hats, and so this is kind of a left turn from the maybe the guitar oriented stuff that we normally talk about. But there is still a connection, and especially when it comes to being iconoclastic, doing it their own way, sticking to their artistic vision in spite of commercial trends. They really fit that bill, and so. Everyone knows the Safety Dance. That's that's not an overlooked track. That's, one of the biggest songs in the last 50 years, probably. Everyone's heard it, everyone knows it. And in some ways it's a good manifesto for them because it really accurately reflects their sound, and it's got a message that might sound kind of superficial and offhand on the surface, but if you listen to the lyrics, it's kind of a low-key protest song. It's a social observation song. It's got a bit of a punk underpinning to the sentiment behind the song, and that's something you really see throughout their catalog. But I think that song overshadows the rest of their catalog to such an overwhelming degree that they're kind of my choice for a catalog that is really creative and iconoclastic and independent, and really sort of rich creatively and successful artistically throughout their entire career. They started off in a very synth pop style, as you can tell, at least commercially they did. They had a few variations before getting that success. There probably aren't many bands that you could say were influenced by Gary Newman, Lou Reed, and ABBA, among other things. But that gives you some idea of just how sort of quirky and varied their aesthetic is. Their music reflects that over the course of time. Their early work on the Rhythm of Youth album that had Safety Dance on it was more varied and interesting. It's synth pop, but it doesn't sound to me like any other synth pop that was made at the time. Some of the same instruments might have been used. They had the Prophet synthesizers and so forth. But if you set it alongside, something else from the time that was similarly well known in the synth pop era, it's not really the same. And that's kind of been the trend throughout, whether it's the lead singer Ivan Doroshuk's sort of strong baritone voice to kind of the aesthetic of their lyrics and music that is playful, but also has kind of an edge to it, making observations about people in society, and it's not just empty-headed dance music. It's really saying something underneath it. And Ivan, the leader of the band, has had a sort of a very inconsistent production over time, where they were very busy during the 80s, would take years of a break and release another album, take a decade off and release another album. And so it was really a case of being moved artistically, I think, to say something else and to put something else out there. And an interesting thing outside of the art itself is that in the 90s he took a decade off of the music industry to raise his son, and so that gives an idea of how he wasn't just one of these, music to the exclusion of everything else, and burning out on sort of a nihilistic empty life. He was connected to something meaningful, and then he comes back a decade ago with another album that sounds like it could have been the follow-up to Rhythm of Youth.
That's
not in
great.
terms of repetition, but in terms of aesthetics, and still sounding valid. And it has songs that are sort of thoughtful and have grown up, and aren't just trying to return. Sonically, there are throwbacks to the old music, but lyrically, thematically, it's from the point of view of someone who is at this age and who has things to reflect on about life in a mature way. Even if it's a bouncy, synth-driven, melodic track, if you sit and listen to the lyrics, and even the way the music echoes them, it has grown up along with him, and that's pretty rare. There are a lot of artists who try to recapture the sound of the old days in a retro way, but they maybe never had a lot to say to begin with, and they don't have a lot to say now, where it's kind of fishing for something to talk about. But what I appreciate about Men Without Hats, along with just enjoying their sound and loving their themes and so forth, is that it was always real. It always had something to say, and it has grown over time to continue to have something to say from where they are, and where Ivan is in his life and what he's experiencing. And so it remains genuine. It remains iconoclastic. These were the guys who their final album for the Polygram label, they offered to take half the budget they were being offered if they could make the record that they wanted to make. And they made a rock record that was all guitars and was not synth driven at all. This was back in the 90s. They had the drummer from Voivod playing on the album, and it had sort of a rock with a country, edge to it. And so they were always kind of reflecting what was around them, but going against the grain in a way that probably hurt the awareness of them overall, but it has preserved the integrity of what they've done. And I think that with a lot of artists that we've talked about here today, and that we just love in our catalogs and have stuck with over time, is that they've stayed true to themselves. They had something that they were really wanting to communicate, and they've stuck to it. They didn't sell out. They didn't vary it. I know sell out is a loaded term, but at the end of the day, they just stuck with what they really had to say, regardless of the trends, regardless of the pressures, regardless of what was expected. And that's what makes the music endure at the end of the day, for me, with these artists and with many others.
Very cool, Kevin. Well, thank you for sharing. And yeah, Men Without Hats is a real outsider artist, I think. I think a lot of people just think of the Safety Dance and that's it, but there's a lot of really great stuff in their catalog as well. Well, if you have watched the video to this point, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe. Kevin and I are looking forward to continuing to grow the channel. We're also looking forward to your comments. Leave them and we will jump in, and we're happy to have conversations with people. We love the comment section, and please share. Like, subscribe, share, and we will see you next time with another conversation. You take care.